Welcome to meeting number 10 of the House of Commons Special Committee on Afghanistan, created pursuant to the order of the House of December 8th, 2021. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. I would like to remind all those present in the room to please follow the recommendations from public health authorities as well as directive of the Board of Internal Economy on October 19th, 2021 to remain healthy and safe. Should any technical challenges arise, please advise me and we may need to suspend for a few minutes to ensure all members are able to participate fully. Before I introduce our witnesses this evening, I wanted to flag some scheduling changes for the honorable members. I have been informed that Minister Jolie is available to appear on May 2nd. However, we were scheduled to hear from witnesses in the first hour and another panel of interpreters in the second hour. So I propose that we accommodate Minister and Global Affairs Canada officials for the full 2 hour next week and reschedule the panel of witnesses to appear on May 16th. As we are quickly running out of time before we must submit our report to the House of Commons, we could ask that interpreters submit a brief, as we have already heard from other interpreters, and we got a brief from other interpreters, and I would suggest that the interpreters that were supposed to appear should submit a brief to the committee. As you know, time is of an essence, and we now then we have to proceed for drafting instructions for the second half of the meeting that we are scheduling on May the 16th, and then consider the report on May the 30th and June the 6th. Unfortunately, I'm told that there's no possibility to add any additional time to any of our upcoming meetings. If everyone is in agreement, then we will proceed with the changes and the schedule, and then I can introduce the witnesses. I hope I have, okay, I can see hand up, and if there's no objections, thank you, and clerk will modify the schedule accordingly. And now I would like to welcome the Honorable Sean Fraser, Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, here today. And I have the experience on the other committee as well, and Minister has been very, very accessible. Minister, I want to welcome you, and with Minister, we have today Deputy Minister Katrina Tapley and Assistant Deputy Minister of Afghanistan, Jennifer McIntyre, Assistant Deputy Minister Operations, Nicole Giles. Minister, you are joining us for full 2 hours today, and you have 10 minutes to your opening remarks. And thank you to you and your officials. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members, for the opportunity to address this committee on the government's effort to resettle Afghan refugees. Merci de me recevoir aujourd'hui.
Thank you for receiving me today.
Humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan last summer, the government initially committed to resettle 20,000 vulnerable Afghan refugees. That commitment has now been increased to bring at least 40,000 Afghan refugees to Canada. As part of this effort, je suis fier de dire que nous avons accueilli.
I am proud to say that we've welcomed over 11,500 Afghans to Canada, with more flights arriving every week.
330 Afghans who supported Canada's mission in Afghanistan arrived on a chartered flight from Pakistan to Calgary, with 2 more charters arriving this week with both privately sponsored and government-assisted refugees on board. There are several distinct and specialized pathways that we implemented as part of this effort to resettle Afghan refugees. This, coupled with the unprecedented logistical obstacles and the dire situation on the ground in Afghanistan, has created very serious challenges to the program. But that's why I'm pleased to be here today, to answer what questions you may have. I did agree to stay for the full 2 hours. I am supposed to be somewhere at 8:30. Perhaps we can stretch that, and I'll leave it to you, Mr. Chair, to determine the logistics of the committee and given the motion that you've just adopted as well. But I am pleased to be here so that I can provide answers to some of your questions and whatever additional information and clarity that I am able to. J'attends avec impatience de recevoir les recommandations.
I am patiently waiting for the recommendations of the committee so that we can continue working to help Afghans. Our programs include the special immigration measures for Afghan nationals who, like those that arrived in Calgary last week, directly assisted the government of Canada as part of our mission in Afghanistan.
Over 40,000 Afghan refugees. We plan to welcome approximately 18,000 individuals and families who had a direct, significant and enduring relationship with Canada through their work with the Departments of National Defence or Global Affairs Canada. A special stream that we've implemented is aimed at resettling 5,000 extended family members of interpreters who are already living in Canada that were not included when their family members were resettled in 2009 and 2012. We also implemented a separate humanitarian stream to welcome even more Afghan refugees based on certain particular vulnerabilities, including women leaders, LGBTQ2+ individuals, human rights defenders, journalists, and members of religious and ethnic minorities. As with our standard refugee programs, the humanitarian stream works through a referral system, and individuals don't apply directly to the program. Instead, individuals are referred by designated partners, trained and experienced at assessing vulnerability and operating in situations of mass displacement and humanitarian hardship. Referral partners include organizations like the United Nations Refugee Agency, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, Frontline Defenders, Protect Defenders, and Canadian private sponsors. In light of the current situation in Afghanistan, and as an exceptional measure, we're waiving the requirement for refugee status determination for some private sponsorship applications, broadening sponsor access to the program.
This is one of the ways we are continuing to work with the thousands of Canadians across the country who want to help any way they can.
These special pathways, we're going to work with partners to use the Economic Mobility Pathways Pilot as well, which is an innovative program designed to help skilled refugees resettle in Canada so we can welcome even more Afghan refugees. By
using our network of migration offices and implementing flexible approaches where possible, we've streamlined applications from Afghanistan to process cases as quickly as we can.
We're identifying and implementing creative solutions wherever we can find them. This includes measures like waiving certain standard requirements, expanding eligibility for certain pre-arrival supports, providing dedicated communication channels, delivering new e-application intake tools, undertaking biometrics collection trips, and mobilizing significant resources. Mr. Chair, by far the biggest challenge is that many of the individuals selected under this special immigration program, they're still in Afghanistan. I need not remind members of this committee, amongst any parliamentarians, that this is a territory that has been seized by the Taliban, a terrorist entity under Canadian law, in which the Government of Canada has no military or diplomatic presence. Our usual international partners are not able to provide typical logistical support and arrange for travel in the ways that you might see through a centrally managed effort that has a large presence with the UNHCR, for example. There are millions of Afghan refugees who fled Afghanistan, and if we want to bring any 40,000 Afghan refugees who are already in third countries, I don't question that we would be able to deliver on that commitment more quickly. However, and this is an important element of this effort to me, we made a commitment to certain individuals and their families on the basis of their work with Canada. We don't plan to waver on that commitment, even if it means doing the harder thing, which is to continue to pursue all avenues to get them here, despite the fact that they might still be in Afghanistan so they can travel on to Canada. Nous faisons tout ce que nous pouvons et trouvons de nouvelles.
We are doing everything we can and innovating new ways to help Afghans inside and outside of Afghanistan, including working with NGOs and engaging with other governments. We are continuing to work to secure safe passage for those in Afghanistan so that they can travel to a safe third country, which allows us to complete application processing and to facilitate onward travel to Canada.
Partners in the region, whether it's our allies, other state partners, international organizations, or nonprofit organizations, so we can identify a path forward. For example, we've been partnering with the veterans-led organization Aman Lara, which is helping evacuate individuals from conflict zones, and they've assisted in the safe passage for now thousands of Afghan refugees who are destined to Canada. The biggest hurdle from this mission, from my point of view, since I've been appointed as the minister responsible for this portfolio, is not the processing capacity of the Government of Canada. It's the situational and environmental factors on the ground in Afghanistan. We share a lot of these challenges with other like-minded partners, and we're not alone in the obstacles that we're facing. I think it's important to put Canada's commitment as well to Afghan refugees in a global context. Unlike other partner countries in the region and some of our allies, we didn't have an established military presence in the months and years prior to the fall of Kabul. And yet we have one of the largest commitments and efforts dedicated to resettling Afghan refugees. On a per capita basis, our goal of bringing at least 40,000 Afghan refugees to Canada places us amongst the top countries in the world when it comes to resettlement. In terms of raw numbers, we would be second only to the United States, who of course benefited from having a large military presence with logistical support that allowed them to evacuate a significantly larger number of people than all other nations. But on a per capita basis, there's no question that we're the most substantial refugee resettlement effort from Afghanistan globally right now. I look at some of the other commitments that our partners have made. In terms, again, of raw numbers, a commitment of 40,000 is larger than that of the United Kingdom, of Australia. It's the same one that's being pursued by the entirety of the European Union, more or less, which has, of course, 10 times our population. Nous avons une longue et fière tradition d'accueil.
We have a long-standing and proud tradition of welcoming the world's most vulnerable, and will continue working hard to bring people to Canada as quickly and safely as possible.
IRCC has now received over a million communications from those who've expressed interest in coming to Canada. Evidently, it's a far larger number than we could manage to bring to our country. Canada is going to continue to work with partners to provide crucial humanitarian aid to those who need it the most in order to support the people of Afghanistan in the years to come. And we will be providing a new home to more than 40,000 Afghan refugees. I know this is going to be incredibly hard news for a lot of vulnerable people, but the really hard reality is that not everyone who's expressed interest in coming to Canada is going to be part of this program. When you deal with more than 1 million requests, now not all of them, of course, formal applications, it's a really difficult thing when you're trying to understand how we can do more to support vulnerable people, knowing that there are vulnerable people who will not be part of the effort. And I think in the global context, again, with 100 million displaced persons around the world, it's not feasible to resettle everyone who's vulnerable globally. And this makes it a particularly challenging exercise. But as we've said, our priority is those who've directly supported Canada's mission in Afghanistan, families of interpreters and other Afghans from groups who are being targeted by the Taliban. And I know that many have been waiting for a response from the Government of Canada regarding their eligibility under the Special Immigration Measures stream. And over the next few weeks, we'll be communicating directly with hundreds more of additional individuals who are newly eligible for the program, as well as many of those who are not going to be eligible at this time. Et permettez-moi d'être clair. Nous avons
Let me be clear. We've worked hard to bring those who are already approved under this program to Canada, and more flights are arriving across the country every week. This in spite of the severe operational challenges that our allies are facing on the ground.
We support Afghans upon their arrival in Canada, and making this broad-reaching initiative a success will continue to require collaboration across the government, as well as with provinces and territories, resettlement and settlement service providers, private sponsors, francophone minority communities, other stakeholders, and all Canadians. We've also established the National Afghan Steering Committee last August, which is led by Fariborz Burjandian. He's a former refugee himself and the executive director of one of the largest and most successful settlement agencies in Canada, the Calgary Catholic Immigration Society. Le comité directeur coordonne les bénévoles.
The steering committee is coordinating volunteers and donations on behalf of all resettlement assistance providers across Canada that are welcoming Afghan refugees into their communities. It's sometimes easy to get lost in the numbers and forget the human element of the story.
Afghans have already arrived in Canada. That's over 11,500 lives, which have...
Excuse me, Minister. I would like you to
wrap up,
please.
Certainly. Well, it's a good note to end on. This is over 11,500 people whose lives have been drastically changed for the better as they're welcomed into their new homes and communities across the country after going through a nightmare that most people could never imagine. I'll save the remainder of my remarks, and to the extent I have an opportunity to work them into answers, I'd be happy to, Mr. Chair, and look forward to whatever questions the committee members may have for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your remarks and for you to be accommodating to the committee members to spend time with us today. And we started at 7:11 p.m. and we'll end the meeting at 9:11 p.m. So without any further ado, I would go to the honorable members. First member is Mr. Hallan for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Just Mr. Chair?
Honorable Chong, go ahead, please.
Just if we could just set aside the last 3 minutes of the meeting to go over the schedule that you outlined at the beginning. I have a proposal to change the meeting of May 16th.
We'll do that.
Okay, thank you.
We'll do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Chong. And now, Mr. Hallan, please go ahead for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for coming to the committee. Minister, on April the 11th, we heard testimony from former Afghan interpreters. They were the ones who came here between 2009 and 12. They even had to, because of the bureaucratic mess that your department had created, they felt that it was important to do a hunger strike on Parliament Hill to outline the failures by your government. Do you know how many times you or your staff have met with them since October 2021?
Minister, go ahead.
I'll be off by a couple. I think they probably met about 28 times. They meet more or less weekly. I've met with them a couple of times myself, including since then.
That's right. There's about 29 times that you and your department have met with them. Out of that, there was promises made to give them UCI numbers and to work with third countries to bring their families safely to Canada. Did you or your office make those commitments?
So I try hard to only make commitments on things that I know to be true. I'll work my tail off to achieve that end. This particular group, we opened up a new pathway because we wanted specifically to bring the extended families of these previously resettled interpreters to Canada. It opened on December 9th. I'm starting to see some movement as recently as last number of weeks in terms of people who are making it through either the eligibility or security phase. You're testing my memory a bit. I think we're now at about 200 that have been through both the eligibility and security phase, another 150 for eligibility, and more being added now.
According to them, only about 35% of the families have received UCI numbers. Not a single family member has arrived here. Can you give an update, or when can you expect for those families to come to Canada, and when can they get 100% of those UCI numbers? Because 6 months is, as you can imagine, it's very unacceptable to even just get UCI numbers.
Yeah, and look, let me say that the people you're talking about are stellar individuals who've served Canada, and we created this program because we want to bring their families here. Some of them have the chief obstacle that most of them face in terms of what the date they're going to get here. And I'll be honest with you, I can't give you that date because they're still in Afghanistan, and some of them face really serious challenges with respect to safe passage. There's others who've made it to Pakistan who face some unique challenges around leaving Pakistan, the travel documents they have issues to. We're going to do everything we can to get as many of their family members here as possible, but I can't nail down a date with specificity because these challenges are subject to factors outside of our control.
According to their testimony, after meeting 29 times, one of the results was there was 16 more requirements added on by your department to them. Do you think that's acceptable?
So, depending on what challenges you're talking about, some of it may have been an effort to actually avoid other steps such as in-person interviews that were not possible, so we could expedite the process despite the fact that that wasn't available. So in and of itself, the number of requirements added to it is not a make or break when it comes to acceptable or unacceptable. It's a matter of whether we're doing everything we can to facilitate their travel to Canada. And if that was what motivated those extra requirements, then I think it would be acceptable. If they were put up for the sake of delaying the process, obviously that would not be, but I expect it was the former, not the latter.
Changing topics now, the red tape, which is really rampant within your department, and the Liberal-made backlog were so bad that the Veterans Transition Network is shutting down their operations in Afghanistan. Groups along with ARC-Salis, Aman Laura, and other veterans groups and NGOs have done quite a bit, and that was at a time when they were doing an evacuation plan, your government was doing an election plan. So they had to do on-the-ground work where your government had continuously failed. And now that because of all the stonewalling and all the other hurdles that are being put in front of them, the obstacles, they feel like they can't do it anymore and they're going to pull out. Why has your department done that? Why are these stonewalling groups that are actually doing more groundwork than in some cases that your government isn't?
So, with respect, first let me say thank you to all the groups that you mentioned, including the Veterans Transition Network. I'd point out Aman Lara has even publicly stated that they were pleased to be working with our office. They've now been responsible for the evacuation of about 2,700 Afghans and have a couple hundred more ready to go with hundreds more each month. We're partnering with them as well, and they're a veteran-run organization that knows exactly what they're doing, and I think it's important that we maintain those partnerships.
Respectfully, Minister, I mean, the red tape has caused them to not want to do it anymore. You know, that's it's unacceptable that a group that wants to step up, and because of Liberal-made backlogs, the red tape that's been put up in front of them, they're pulling out.
So I got to disagree with you on something here, and I think this is really, really important. The red tape issues, like there are real bottlenecks in this mission, and then there's noise that we can always work on. But the real bottleneck here is safe passage outside of Afghanistan. There are other issues as well, but the challenges that we're experiencing is not that we are putting up so many administrative hurdles for people to go through the process. It's not the processing capacity or any a big inventory of cases. It's the fact that it's really difficult to move through a territory that's controlled by the Taliban.
I would argue with that, Minister, because the rate of approvals is quite low compared to Ukraine.
Mr. Hallan, sorry to interrupt
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Your time is up, and we're going to move to Madam Jahid for 6 minutes, please. Sister Salma Jahid for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Minister, for appearing before this committee. Minister, there has been a lot of confusion among the public and as well as at this committee about the differences between the situation for the people looking to leave Ukraine and people looking to leave Afghanistan. So could you briefly explain some of the differences, such as the ability for Canada to operate in each country and the ease with which people can leave in each of the two countries?
Thank you for that question. I think it's a fair question to ask, but I think what I see when I look at the different challenges present with the effort to bring Afghan refugees to Canada and Ukrainians who are seeking a temporary safe haven, there's some similarities in that people are fleeing a conflict zone at the hands of evil. But in terms of the logistical challenges and the appropriateness of different immigration measures, there's some unique facets that I think are worth exploring. Some of the things that makes Ukraine, from a logistics point of view, somewhat simpler, to your point, is we have operations in and around the region, and we've had the opportunity to move equipment into the region because we have long-established presences throughout Europe. I think we've got 34 locations that we have visa application centers, biometrics kits, and we were able to move people to the region to prepare for it ahead of time. Similarly, even still today, there are significant numbers of people who are seeking to flee Ukraine who can flee westerly. And although it's very dangerous compared to a Canadian standard, people are able to exit the country to the west and travel throughout Europe to other locations where we may have a presence. That's not true in Afghanistan. We don't have a military or diplomatic presence there now. We don't have access to people for the purpose of collecting biometrics. But the other big difference, and this is a really difficult one when I speak with Afghan refugees who've made it to Canada, they love their homeland just as much as I love mine, just as much as Ukrainians love theirs. And there is a real heartbreaking piece of the conversation when they share with you that they know it's not going to be safe for them to go back. They need to have a permanent resettlement program. With respect to those who are coming from Ukraine, we hear time and time again that the people who are seeking to come here need a safe place to stay while the war ravages their homeland. But they intend to return when it's safe to do so and want to be very much part of the rebuild of Ukraine on the back end. So these different scenarios create different challenges. And at the end of the day, though, I think it's important that we use the right tool for a unique job in each circumstance.
Thank you. Minister, my next question is in regards to the situation for Afghan refugees currently who are in Pakistan. One of the bordering countries that has accepted refugees from Afghanistan. So a big number of Afghans are presently in Pakistan. So could you please discuss the challenges for Afghans to enter this country and how long Afghan refugees are able to stay and what is needed from these refugees and what can Canada do to allow them to travel to Canada and how we can make that process easier for them?
Yeah, thank you for this. So obviously, when you just look at the geography, Pakistan provides one of the handful of places people have been able to get to since this mission began. We actually are seeing significant numbers of people move through Pakistan now and onward to Canada. In fact, the flight I mentioned that landed in Calgary last week with some of those who made a contribution to our mission came through Pakistan. I believe one of the two landing this week is also coming from Pakistan. So we are seeing significant numbers of people moving. It's not that simple for everyone who's made it to Pakistan. And one of the challenges that I find really, really difficult in this position is that in different third countries, there are sometimes exit controls put on a person's ability to travel. And those requirements somewhat change by times. And sometimes there's controls on their entry based on what documentation they need. Sometimes it depends on whether you've traveled by road, walked across the border at an irregular point of entry, or whether you've come in by air. And when you have changing criteria to enter the country and exit controls that are beyond the control of the Government of Canada, it can make it a real challenge. So we continue to have conversations with our partners in the region, organizations who have relationships on the ground, to do whatever we can to prevent the circumstance where people get to a third country but then face the potential that they may have to go back before they can be eventually resettled in Canada. This is not an easy problem to solve, but I'm very, very encouraged by the recent flight that landed and the one that will be landing this week as well.
Chair, how much time do I have?
32 seconds.
Okay, just like quickly, can you please discuss the for those of sponsorship agreement holder organizations who are willing to sponsor people like privately sponsored refugees, is there any plan that their quota will be increased specifically for the Afghan refugees, or they have to remain within their specified quotas for the year?
We don't have much time. We'll keep looking at options to do more with our partners as sponsorship agreement holders. They're excellent partners to work with when it comes to private resettlement, and we'll keep looking at options to do more in partnership with them.
Thank you, Madam Jahid. Your time is up, and now we'll go to Mr. Brunel de Sepp for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank the Minister for making himself available for 2 hours. That honors him, so I'll start very quickly. Mr. Minister, through you, Mr. Chair, the Permanent Committee asked you, the Minister, to waive the status determination, to waive the recommendation, the requirement for status determination. Are you going to follow that recommendation, yes or no?
So indulge me for 30 seconds because it's a little bit more complicated than an ordinary just decision to waive the refugee status determination. I'm looking at the 40,000 commitment. We've got nearly half of that group is likely to be made up of those who've made a contribution to Canada. We've already waived that requirement for that group. We're working with sponsorship agreement holders who are largely resettling people who are outside of the country, and they don't need refugee status determination already if you're a sponsorship agreement holder working with people outside of the country. I'm looking at the extended families of the previously resettled interpreters who came in 2009 and 2012. They don't need one either. When I'm looking at our suite of programs, I don't see that there will be a need to waive because the people who are going to make up our program don't require it already.
Monsieur le ministre, ça fait 30 secondes.
Miss Minister, 30 seconds. I'm sorry. I need a yes or a no. The request was made by a committee where your permanent secretary sits. I understand you can't answer with a yes or a no. Were the members of that committee, did they make any request to you? Yes or no?
Sorry, are you saying did they make a request? Or are you saying will
Ça a été un communiqué fait par...
The communique was made by SIM. The communique was made by Liberal members, supported by Liberal members of the committee.
From my perspective, we don't need to because we already have for the groups that are coming in. There's a unique issue around other private sponsors, but we don't currently have a plan for those other private sponsors.
Merci, vous nous dites qu'on...
Thank you. You're telling us we don't need it. You also said that Canada has brought in many Afghans under the government assistance program. So why did the UN not provide the space for the files of Afghan refugees to be referred to Canada?
So we're working with different referral partners, and the UNHCR has had a little bit of a challenge because their capacity in the region over the last number of years has dwindled significantly. They're starting to ramp up operations really in the last couple of months in the region. But our referral partners with the are not just the UN. We've worked with the United States. We work with nonprofit partners for the people who made a contribution to the government's mission in Afghanistan. We use DND and GAC. So the UNHCR is one of the referral partners we use, but not the only one, and that's perhaps why they may have a smaller number in this particular effort compared to other traditional refugee resettlement programs.
I have a specific question for you, because many groups contacted us. Maybe you've met them as well. Could you tell us why you did not recognize Hazaras as a persecuted group?
So Hazaras could qualify on the basis of referrals into our program with some of these organizations as a religious or ethnic minority who's discriminated against by the Taliban. You could be eligible, but we do rely on the referral partners that we work with to assess a person's vulnerability to have them be entered into the program.
Mais est-ce que vous le considérez?
But do you consider that so? Because it's extremely important for those people at this time.
So there have been Hazaras resettled in Canada already. There could be more if they get referred into our program by our referral partners.
OK. Jusqu'ici, vous nous avez...
You've said that we have hardly 11,500 people who have arrived in Canada at this pace. We will not even get to 50% of our target. Are we going to have a new target? And if we don't attain that target, what are you going to do?
So I am very confident we are going to attain our target. I see the regular pace of arrivals now. There's virtually a flight or more each week that I've been seeing coming in for the last few months, really. I do see that we're having a regular pace. The biggest challenge to meeting our target on the schedule that I've discussed before of next year is no longer anything to do with the capacity of IRCC. It's whether we can secure safe passage for the people we've made a commitment to who are still in Afghanistan. There's about 10,000 who've already been through the eligibility approval process that are still in the country now. And solving that safe passage through and outside of Afghanistan will be the next bottleneck we need to
À ce moment-là, si vous pensez que vous allez pouvoir...
If you think you attain that target, I understand. I think it would be good for the minister to present a detailed plan by the end of 2022. It could be a table. We just want to see what the rhythm is that the minister intends to use to get to the target, since you are saying that you are going to attain a target. So you should have a clear plan in the department. So it would be good for the committee to have that plan. Is it possible, Mr. Minister?
But Minister, you can respond quickly.
So there's not a specific schedule of the exact number of people. We're seeing roughly a flight with a few hundred people on a weekly basis. I expect something like that to continue, subject to the challenge I mentioned on the safe passage issue for those who are still in the country.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bruno.
Thank you.
Now we will go to Madam Kwan for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Minister for coming to our committee. I just want to follow up on the former interpreters issue. With respect to the additional documentations that's being required of them, many of them would not be able to produce them because they've actually had to burn them. Their family members have had to burn them. And what they're asking for the government then in those instances, really, generally speaking, is to waive the onerous documentation requirements and to provide them with a single travel journey document so that they can exit Afghanistan to a third country. Will the minister do that, same as what is being done for Ukraine?
So just to clarify, that's a little bit different than what's being done for Ukraine. So we can issue single journey travel documents for people who are seeking to come to Canada through Afghanistan or a third country. But after they get the travel document after they've completed the process. The challenge that I see with what you've proposed, which is issuing a single journey travel document that would allow them to exit Afghanistan, is that it doesn't actually solve the safe passage issue. Sorry, it looks like you want to jump back in?
Yeah, I do want to jump back in. But first, for them to actually get out of Afghanistan, they need to have that as a travel document. And then we can talk about exiting the third country. But without that first document, they can't go anywhere. And they're stuck in Afghanistan. So will the minister then issue single travel journey documents for these Afghans?
So a Canadian single journey travel document doesn't guarantee you entry into a country from Afghanistan into Pakistan or Tajikistan, for example. The requirements to enter into those countries will be set by those countries, but having a travel document to come to Canada doesn't satisfy that requirement.
Well, according to the Afghan witnesses, or the witnesses who's presented to the committee, many of them have actually said, if you present us with a single travel document, journey document, we would find a way to a third country. And so, there seems to be some discrepancy then. The minister is saying even if they got one, they can't get into a third country. But they're saying that they could. But then even so, the minister is not issuing those documents to them and then requiring them to provide all kinds of documentations to which some of them will not have because they've had to burn them. And that is the reality. And I ask that the minister to please understand that. If the idea is that the single travel document, single travel journey document is not a thing that would work, then find a mechanism that would work. Because right now, none of it is working, and people cannot get to safety. I want to actually raise this issue as well. With the people who've actually made it to Pakistan, and there are, I've been advised, about 700 Afghans who've actually made it to Pakistan, and they cannot, Canada has not done the final step to bring them here to Canada. So will the minister organize evacuation flights for those individuals?
So evacuation flights from Pakistan, like there are people who are in Pakistan that are able to leave now, and an evacuation flight wouldn't necessarily, it's a solution to a problem that we're not having right now. The issues facing people who've made it into Pakistan depend greatly on the individual case files, oftentimes on the basis of which a person has entered into Pakistan. Particularly when people have crossed into Pakistan in an unofficial way. And there's a big challenge for certain people who didn't enter with proper documentation to leave Pakistan, even though they have very good reasons for not having that documentation. So I don't think an evacuation flight solves the problem of getting people here. If there's people who've been approved to come to Canada, we're seeing that there's an ability for people to be moved from Pakistan to Canada. There's no
question. Some people actually enter Pakistan or a third country illegally because they have no other means to do so. That's the only way they can actually get away as best as they can from the Taliban. And so we have to recognize that. And then for them to be in that third country, for them to fly to Canada, it means a single travel document, journey document would assist them. It means that waiving those documentation requirements would assist them. It means that waiving the refugee determination requirements, which, by the way, they would need if they were to extend their stay in a country such as Pakistan, for example, because their visa in Pakistan would actually expire. All of those things come together. So the minister needs to look at these issues not in a single tunnel vision, but rather in a broad vision, and what the combination of approaches that could be done to assist individuals, instead of saying, oh, well, if you do this, it will only help that, it won't help that. But if you do all of these together, it would actually make a difference. So this is what the families are urging the minister to do. I also want to ask the minister, because I'm quickly running out of time, does the minister consider women athletes as women leaders? Because none of them has been able to actually get access to come to Canada safely.
I don't try to delve too deeply into, after we set the criteria, into selecting which groups qualify for the program. Certainly, I think some could, but we allocate spaces to referral partners who then identify people typically based on their vulnerability. So we make sure that we're bringing in people who are at risk of persecution.
On the question around groups to determine who meets the vulnerability requirement, would the minister expand the groups to agencies such as Amnesty International, other reputable organizations, to waive the refugee determination requirement?
I don't want to announce, having not spoken with other groups, that we're going to have new referral partners come on. Happy to consider what recommendations the committee may make, but the groups that we work with are not unprofessional or don't have the capacity. I'm talking about the UNHCR.
I'm not suggesting that they're
Madam
unprofessional. I'm simply saying that you need to expand the amount of groups.
Sorry, I have to go to my own member of parliament. Madam can leave for 5 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, Mr. Chair, to the Minister. This committee has heard a lot of testimony, many witnesses describing your department as slow to react, overly bureaucratic, risk-averse, and even indifferent to the fate of our Afghan allies and their families. And when I put that to you, I am distinguishing between the allies, the Afghan allies of ours who fought alongside our Canadians, helping them with language, helping them with culture, and those who were already outside of Afghanistan waiting as refugees to come here. Because you've mentioned several times, spent quite a bit of time on the 40,000 number, but that does not help these people and their families who were promised that for helping us and standing up for us, that they would be helped to be brought here. So what do you say for your department when we are hearing this testimony week after week in this committee?
So my starting point first is I've gotten to know the people who work in the department, who work in my office, who worked in the previous minister's office. Indifference could not be further from the truth. These are honest, hardworking people who wanted to do whatever they could to save people's lives, who made a contribution to Canada, and I think that's common, frankly, with staff and members from all parties. One of the things that I think is really important that we reflect on is that the challenges and delays are driven by the circumstances that are touched by violent conflicts. When I look at I'll acknowledge as well that I don't actually think that permanent, ordinary refugee resettlement programs are particularly well designed to respond to crises as they occur in real time. there's a certain number of things that we've done that are very unique with respect to Afghanistan to try to address some of those. And then, again, when I look at the other crisis that we're dealing with from a migration point of view in Ukraine, different innovative tools we were able to develop to respond to that crisis.
I'm sorry, we only have a limited amount of
Sure.
time, so
your time.
we're not getting to the specifics because you talk about timelines, and there was a time before the withdrawal in Afghanistan when this government had a good 5 months to get people out and had freedom of movement. There were supporting countries. We had diplomatic relations then. Why didn't this government act sooner to help our allies and their families then?
Look, although there were some people who were talking about the deteriorating situation in Afghanistan, I think you saw the world community of like-minded nations responded about the same time. And I'll be the first to say that the fall of Kabul happened more quickly, though I wasn't in this position at the time, more quickly than I anticipated. At the time, I mean, we can talk about the different level of relative presence on the ground, but if I put it into perspective, I think the United States had 110 planes on site. Canada at the time, having ceased our military operations a number of years before, had 2, and one of them wasn't in great working order.
We've heard testimony in this committee that, in fact, there was Canadian intelligence on the ground for months before who were informing our embassy and this government as to the movement of the Taliban and what was happening. And yet, we also heard testimony from the ambassador that it all seemed to happen within a day or two. So there's conflicting testimony at this committee, but anyone watching the Taliban's movements would have seen them on the move, and certainly people in the official opposition and veterans were telling your government, this is happening and we have to get these people out. And we seem completely ill-prepared, and now we're in a situation where your department, now you are the minister, seems to expect these allies and their families to apply online for any number of assistance. How do you expect them to do that when the Taliban is in control of the country? They can't just go to an internet cafe. They can't be using cell phones or computers because they're being hunted down.
Mr. Quick response, please.
Look, there was a lot wrapped up into the question. I think one of the things that you come to realize when you take over the helm of an effort like this is there are very real challenges that people have who are trying to access your programs. You do what you can to accommodate as many people as possible, but the things that keep me up at night, despite the fact that you get an immense reward when you meet people who've come and have a new lease on life in your country or your community, the people who aren't able to access a program stays with you. And there are going to be challenges. There are going to be people who don't make it into the program. But we do everything we can to facilitate people's participation in the program, whether it's by setting up dedicated service lines to call or email, or where we have access to them in person to make exceptions to those practices. But you try to respond to the individual needs of the people you're trying to help as best as you possibly can.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Madam Finley. Now I'll go to Madam Dama for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Chair. And Minister, thank you for joining us tonight and for the work you and your team are doing in Afghanistan and Ukraine and around the world. Minister, we had a number of NGOs who were here early in our committee meetings talk about the terrorist financing rules that Canada has in place and the issues that has caused for them delivering aid and education programs and many other things into Afghanistan. I'm just wondering in what you're seeing in terms of immigration, because we've heard a lot about Afghans being unable to leave the country, and whether that terrorism financing legislation is causing issues on the immigration side as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So one of the things that's a bit odd, this is a law that was developed a number of years ago in response to a very different circumstance, and I would hazard to guess the drafters weren't contemplating a scenario of its application where a terrorist organization would actually seize control of a country and assert authority to govern. It's created certain challenges. I think you've heard testimony from other witnesses more on the humanitarian aid point of view. There are some things, like my chief obstacle right now is more tied to the safe passage. In theory, when you start to think about the different kinds of operations you could have should you gain access to the country, if there's some taxation issues where the Taliban's trying to collect funds, that it could pose challenges. So it's something that we're looking at. It seems to be more of an immediate concern on the humanitarian side of things, but it's not without application in the immigration context. So we keep an eye on it and look to see if there's solutions we can advance before it starts to cause greater challenges. But it's something we have to watch closely. But to date, the far bigger challenge that I'm facing is safe passage of Afghans throughout the country, and then for onward travel to Canada.
So on that, though, on the safe passage, one of the groups to whom I spoke has said they could assist with that safe passage if they were able to get funds on the ground. Have you heard that, Minister?
In the early days of my tenure in this position, there was some conversations about I risk stepping on the toes of one of my colleagues. There were some conversations about the role of global affairs and partnering with some groups like that. It hasn't been a sort of frequently cited challenge that's come up for those who might be able to facilitate with safe passage. I'd also point out that we are partnering with groups right now that have now moved almost very soon it'll be nearly 3,000 people outside of the country. So there are ways to work where we don't have fears that this particular challenge will be engaged, but it is something, in case other solutions present themselves, that we need to consistently look out for.
Minister, you talked a lot about the challenges with third countries. And so we have even people who are able to get out of the country. It's been a challenge. And we heard testimony from people who talked about, can't Canada just give them their documents? And Ms. Kwan was asking you a similar question. Are these countries like Pakistan accepting Canada's documents? It sounds like a good solution when you hear it, but on the ground, does it actually help people to get out of the country safely?
So I'll ask your forgiveness in advance. There's no clear answer for any given individual when they show up at the border of a third country from Afghanistan, because the requirements seem to shift over time. Depending on which mode of transportation you've used, whether you've crossed in accordance with local laws or have, as Ms. Kwan pointed out, many people seek to cross contrary to local laws because they need to protect themselves. All of these factors impact how a country will respond to different documents that you have on hand. With respect to certain travel documents, though, that would permit a person to travel onward to Canada, we have made a decision that before you get permission to travel to Canada, you need to be approved under the process and complete the process of getting here. So we don't want to shortcut the process by issuing a travel document that gets a person to a third country but not on to Canada. We do want to make sure that when a person gets that travel document, it's to come to Canada. There are other things we're willing to do to work with people as they get partway through the process, complete their eligibility screening, get their initial biographic details. We can provide information to that applicant about the status of their application. If they want to try to use it, they're free to. But we can't consistently say that yes, a certain document entitles you to enter or exit a different country.
Thank you very much, Madam Dama. We will move to Mr. Brunel to have 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll come back to what my colleague has just said. The fact that the Taliban are considered a terrorist group. You know that there are NGO members who came here and testified, telling us that they had difficulty working on the ground, sending humanitarian aid because they're afraid of being prosecuted by the Canadian government. That was clearly stated here in committee. We remember that I tabled a motion in the House of Commons simply asking that NGOs not be prosecuted because they just want to do their job. That was supported by all parties except your party, Mr. Minister. Do you believe that it's possible that you could put pressure on your colleagues to support the motion if I table it again, because there are many in the Liberal caucus who wanted to support that motion?
Thank you. And look, you'll have to forgive me if I don't have the fine details of the motion. I would want to make sure that we move forward. And let me for the sake of clarity, I would like to make sure that this legislation doesn't prevent humanitarian aid from going to vulnerable people or potentially to interfere with other aspects of the government of Canada's efforts in Afghanistan. Whether it's the proposal that your motion identified or not, I would want to make sure I have the benefit of legal advice. I would hate to create what feels like a great solution on the floor of the House of Commons, where we all feel good about having tried to do something positive that potentially doesn't actually solve the problem. And I think you want to get the legal solution the right way.
I know I don't have much time, but do you think it's normal that today you are a member of cabinet? It's a solution being requested by NGOs and no member of cabinet. Even Minister Sargent told us that there was no legal opinion on that issue, whereas it's been more than 8 months that it's been going on. How come your government has not been able to come up with a legal opinion for the situation to change so that people on the ground could be helped, whereas it's so simple to do it? Don't you think there's a problem?
Sure. So I can't speak to what conversations were had about this going back to the very beginning. I think it's the kind of thing that we should continue to look for a solution for, whether it requires a legislative fix or whether it's something that can be avoided by the nature of the activities that we conduct ourselves in, will depend on a bit of further analysis I think we need to conduct. But I don't have time to get into a full answer because I'm running out here.
Why has it not been done?
Mr. Bruno Duceppe, thank you. And we will move to Madam Kwan for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
You know, the minister's answer to Ms. Damhoff is actually contradictory. On the one hand, and what Afghan interpreters' families have said is this. They're told that they need to get to a third country. And then when they get to a third country, they're told, oh, what are you doing in a third country? You need to actually be in Afghanistan because we can't guarantee you passage if you're in a third country. So on goes in a round circle that nobody can actually figure out what is the right thing to do. And people have used all the different kinds of measures as best as they can in a survival mode in order to try and get access to safety. I would urge the minister to use flexibility in terms of addressing these issues for these families instead of the rigid approach to say you have to go through A, B, and C in order to get to D. Otherwise, people will not be able to get to safety. I also have this question for the minister. Human rights defenders have received written messages from GAC indicating that their application has been deemed as eligible by GAC for the special immigration measures and have been forwarded to IRCC for processing. That was 8 months ago, yet IRCC has not even acknowledged receipt of the application. What is the holdup?
So there were two questions that you asked, or 2 points you made, perhaps. So on the first, with respect to third countries, my understanding is that people are, by and large, being told they should try to get to a third country in accordance with the laws of that country. The documents that we're talking about issuing in this conversation don't entitle a person typically to enter another country. A journey document to Canada doesn't necessarily mean that you get into another country. Similarly, exit controls that third country may put in place may depend on what documentation a person has. But if they've not entered in accordance with local laws, I understand that can actually be a factor that interferes. It looks like you want to...
Minister, you have 30 seconds to answer my other question. Please don't repeat the same stuff over again.
So with respect to the individual circumstances with the referral piece, typically speaking, I would have to dig in to see the status of an individual case file. But we would, once we have somebody referred into our program, we would typically start processing it.
Well, I'm happy to pass that information to the minister, but it's not just one case. There's a class of people, group of people, where they're just staying stuck and they're not actually getting forward, moving forward with their application, and they're stuck with IRCC. It is the exact red tape that's being created.
Thank you, Madam Kwan, and I appreciate your intervention. And now I would love to welcome again Honorable O'Toole, and sorry for the mix-up in the last meeting because I was a little bit emotionally affected. But today, Honorable O'Toole, you have full 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You must have been surprised to see me for some reason. Minister, it's good to have you here. I'm going to use my time judiciously. Section 25.1 of the Act allows you to have direct ministerial interventions on humanitarian grounds. How many of those have you or your delegate in the department issued with respect to the Afghan refugee situation?
I'll have to follow up with you to determine the answer specifically to that question.
Can you undertake to provide that to this special committee?
I think I can provide you with that answer.
Yeah, the number. The United States, up until August 31st, so several weeks after the fall of Kabul, the United States and some allies rescued approximately 120,000 refugees. For the tail end of August, Canada was in an election under caretaker convention. How many ministerial exemptions were provided during that time, August 15th to the end of August, to help facilitate the rescue of people? I understand you weren't the minister, but do you know how many were issued?
I'd maybe ask the officials who are with us in case they have that information. I don't have that information with me today.
Madam Tapley? Anyone want to respond?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, we'll have to get back to you with a precise number.
Thank you.
If we could have tabled with the committee the number of specific exemptions given during that time period in August, and perhaps in the 5 months ahead of time, because to my colleagues, Mr. Halan's point, for months before the fall of Kabul, veteran organizations and many NGOs were demanding swifter action when it would have been possible for us to use our assets, C-17s and other aircraft, to get people out. You were not the minister at the time. Was there any initiative underway as part of your briefing that, as a new minister, that told you how many we were able to get out in the previous 6 months?
Minister?
Prior to the 6 months prior to my appointment in this position?
Prior to the fall of Kabul.
The information that I've got is sort of just in advance of the fall of Kabul. I believe we're dealing with about 3,700 people who've been resettled in Canada who were evacuated from the area around that time.
Ms. Kwan mentioned a single travel document that would help facilitate people getting out of Afghanistan or the region largely. Is your department working on currently such a document, which is the #1 request of many of the refugees and their families?
So we can issue single journey travel documents after a person completes the process and is eligible and approved to come to Canada. We can do that, but we don't have plans to start issuing travel documents before a person has completed the process to become approved.
Do they have to give documentation to secure that document?
They would need to also complete the biometrics process before they can be approved to come to Canada. We're not using it to shortcut the process to get people here without having gone through the approval process.
You said in your remarks that you plan not to waver from our commitment to the people who are at risk due to serving Canada. When do you anticipate, what timeline from now going forward, completing this evacuation? In months? Is there a timeline that your department is using?
We anticipate that we'll be able to complete this next year, was the commitment I've made publicly. The precise date will depend upon our ability to secure safe passage for the people that we've made a commitment to that are still in Afghanistan. We pursue a number of different strategies and with different partners to make that happen, but that is one that I can't with a straight face tell you there's a certain date where the 40,000th person is going to arrive, because we have to deal with facts that remain uncertain and challenges that remain unsolved.
Is there a date for the people located outside of Afghanistan? I gave you a document relating to a family of a constituent who's in Tajikistan. Is there a shorter time frame for people that we know are outside of Afghanistan that their families can expect them to return home?
It will depend on the individual case where a particular person is. For the most part, and I want to be careful not to specifically speak to an individual case, because I don't want to create that expectation when I don't have the facts, and obviously there'd be privacy concerns. We're seeing right now that there's a pretty good ability for us to move people who are in a third country and have been approved. We're seeing a pace of arrivals in excess of about 1,000 a month right now, with a new large plane arriving on a weekly basis, sometimes more frequently. So if you were to sort of follow that logic, you would find yourself sometime into next year, not too deep into the year. So I'm not as worried about making good on our commitment to those people who are already outside of Afghanistan. I'm not worried about us wavering in our commitment to those in Afghanistan. There's less certainty around the specific date of the arrivals for people who are in Afghanistan.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Toole. Your time is up, and I appreciate the tone that you have set up for the committee. Very best. And now we'll move to Mr. Baker for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair and Minister. Thank you for being with us here today. I think what I wanted to do was start by recapping some of what I've heard. So I've heard that, and I think it's fair to say that all of us here at this committee, yourself, Minister, we want to make sure that we bring as many refugees from Afghanistan here to Canada as soon as possible, that the government set a commitment to bring 40,000 refugees by the end of 2023, that 11,500 have arrived, that 10,000 more, if I understand you correctly, Minister, have been approved, but are in Afghanistan and need to get out of the country to be able to come to Canada. And so that's a total of 21,500 that have either come to Canada or have been approved and are still in Afghanistan and need to find their way out. So to reach our target of 40,000, that leaves a balance of about 18,500. And you know, we've heard about that there are millions of Afghan refugees that have fled Afghanistan. So can you explain why we've not been able to reach the target of 40,000 yet?
Sure. So there's a couple of different factors at play. And sorry, there's just an issue. There's something weird going on with my earpiece. My apologies. So there's a couple of different things that I think you got to understand. And you left out a key group as well of people who are already in a third country that have been approved. We also started this parliament at the point where I was appointed. We had initially a commitment that we'd made before the last federal election to resettle 20,000 Afghan refugees. We've had to formally increase that commitment beyond the campaign commitment so we could actually implement and approve additional spaces. But one of the things that's really important for people to appreciate, when you look at the process, it's a little bit different for government-assisted refugees compared to privately sponsored refugees, and it's a little different for the humanitarian cases as compared to the special immigration measures for the people who made a contribution to Canada's mission. One of the things that they have in common is that I don't sit in my office in Ottawa and say, there's a group of people right there, let's fill up the spaces we have available. We use referral partners for a reason. On the special immigration measures, the people who made a contribution to Canada, we want DND and GAC, who are placed most closely to the people who worked for them, to be able to identify who amongst the people who've applied can qualify for our programs. Similarly, when we deal with a private sponsorship group, or government-assisted refugees, but we have a referral partner, we leave it to those groups to identify the individuals that will be subscribed to our program, typically on the basis of their vulnerability. So when you're dealing with spaces we've granted to the UNHCR, for example, and they're ramping up operations in a region. They don't necessarily have the ability to deal with 10,000 people who've already been approved and are waiting for a country to take them. And in the case of a traditional refugee resettlement effort, it might look something a little bit more like that. But when you're responding to a crisis in real time, it makes it really challenging. I made the point earlier that if we just wanted to pick any 40,000 Afghan refugees, it would be much easier because, to your point, there's been people who fled Afghanistan in large numbers for a very long time. And we wanted to make sure that we didn't waver on our commitment to help those who've helped us. And we've made commitments to the family members of interpreters who were resettled here previously. And when you're making a commitment to people who are still in the country, it changes the landscape to a significant degree. But I think it's important that we continue to work with our referral partners to fill out these programs, which I expect will be done actually quite quickly.
I appreciate that. And so what I heard you say, and I thank you for flagging for me that that I'd missed a group of people who are out of country who fled Afghanistan and have already been approved. So if you had to identify, I'm just thinking about the folks at home who are following this, or some of the witnesses who've presented to us who might be watching today, or reading your testimony or watching your testimony. What if you had to summarize what the key sort of bottlenecks are for that remaining number of people? Somewhere to reach our target, right? So 40,000 per person target. I'm approximating between the folks that have been approved inside Afghanistan and the folks who have arrived. There's a few more. There's others who've been approved who are outside Afghanistan. Like, what would you say are the key bottlenecks to bringing those people here?
Very briefly, Minister.
Sure. We need to get them into the program. We need to work with the groups who are going to refer them into the program, and our referral partners have been great, and some are a little more quick than others, and that's great. But the bottleneck to getting people here, the ones outside the country that are approved, I have faith they're going to be able to be landing in large numbers in the months ahead. The biggest bottleneck is that it's really tough to move people through Afghanistan, and the documentation required to get them into a third country where we can complete the process and have them travel onto Canada. That's the big problem that needs to be solved for those who are still in Afghanistan.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. And now we'll move on to round number 3. We'll start with Honorable Chong for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, thank you for appearing in front of our committee. I want to begin by asking about the special immigration program for Afghans that have a significant or enduring connection to Canada that was announced on July 23rd of last year. How many applications have been received under this program?
I don't mean to not be straightforward. What you mean by applications changes the answer to the question. So we actually, with respect to SIMS, someone could fill out a web form indicating interest. Then they would get referred into the program by our referral partners, and we issue an invitation to apply. And then that's at that stage they.
So how many invitations to apply have been sent out?
I don't have the precise number. Do one of our officials have? I can provide it after if that's fine.
If you or officials,
I have it, Minister. If you
hold on.
Perfect.
One person at a time. Madam Tapley.
Minister, we have 14,818 applications, and that's by individual.
Thank you. Mr. Chong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How many of those 14,818 applications have been approved?
Minister or the officials?
If my officials have the number with them, I'd be happy to provide it.
Of that number, we have approved more than 10,000 of those applications. 5,644 of those are here in Canada and resettled. We have another almost 5,000 in our landing inventory, meaning they've been approved, and the rest of those applications are under various stages of review and processing.
Honorable Chong.
Thank you. How many of those 5,000, roughly 5,500 individuals here in Canada had left Afghanistan by the end of August of last summer?
Deputy Minister Tapley.
So with the exodus from Kabul, we were able to resettle about 3,700 initially. I'll have to double check if all of them fall into that same category of special immigration measures that we put in place, but the majority of those would have fallen into that category.
Honorable.
Well, thank you for that. I believe a significant number of the 3,700 were not Afghans, but other nationals. But I think we can clarify that later. If you have that more detailed information, that would be helpful.
They were all Afghans, Mr. Chair.
All 3,700 were Afghans? Oh. Is that
Sorry, that's correct.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that. Minister, why was Canada so much slower and on a per capita basis? In the opening remarks, you mentioned measuring Canada's per capita contributions. Why did we punch below our weight on a per capita basis in the days leading up to the end of August of last summer? And when I say we punched below our weight, as the Deputy Minister has indicated, Canada evacuated some 3,700 people from Kabul by the end of August of last summer. The United Kingdom has approximately double Canada's population, and under Operation Pitting, which was their analog to Operation Aegis, they evacuated 13,000 people from Afghanistan by the end of August of last year. So why is it that on a per capita basis, we did about half of what they were able to do when it came to evacuating Afghans with an enduring and significant tie to Canada?
So one of the things I think is important to understand is we didn't have a significant logistical presence on the ground that allowed us to move large numbers of people to the same degree that, like certainly the United States had. I would point out a lot of the folks who may have evacuated larger numbers in those few key days or weeks. We've now caught up to, or even in some instances surpassed, in terms of the number of people who are already resettled. With the UK, it's an interesting comparison because some people are there, but their status is not yet finalized. But we are, I have full faith going to surpass those numbers soon. But to your question, in those few key days, really has to deal with the fact that we hadn't had a military presence since 2014, and even our diplomatic presence wasn't of a nature that allowed us to move thousands and thousands of people in a very short period of time. It required a lot of collaboration with others.
Honorable Chong, thank you very much for your intervention. And now we'll move on to Mr. Sidhu for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, and your hardworking team at IRCC for taking the time to be with us today and sharing your insights. I know we very much appreciate your approachability to join this very important committee. Minister, in your department's news release on August 13th, you listed the Manmeet Singh Bhullar Foundation as an organization you would be working with. Can you speak to the work and legacy of this group in terms of Afghanistan?
Thank you. First of all, and I have had the opportunity to meet with representatives from the Manmeet Singh Bhullar Foundation. I know there's people sitting at this table who have connections to the organization, and Maninder, your advocacy for them is really deeply appreciated. I don't need to regale folks with the history of the organization. It was obviously somebody who's made a remarkable contribution to public life in Canada and has made it his mission before he sadly passed away to help resettle some vulnerable minority groups, including a group of Afghan Sikhs that I had the pleasure to meet with during a recent trip when I was with one of my colleagues who happens to be chairing this committee. When I see it blew me away. And sorry, I'm at a bit of a loss for words. A room filled with almost 100 people. Not all of them came in this particular instance from this one particular group. Included a 75-year-old man who's wanting to work and give back to Canada. We had young kids. who were very grateful to be there, and to see this group who potentially faced persecution to not just be welcome to Canada, but to come with a spirit of wanting to give back, it's really been an extraordinary experience.
Just to the information of the committee, I met with Mr. Puller, Amalmi's dad, yesterday in Calgary, and there's only one family that's left. Every other family, he told me, that is here in Canada. Ms. Sidhu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Minister for those insights. Minister, speaking about settlement agencies and the work that many groups here in Canada are doing, as you know, Canada has a stellar reputation of welcoming the world's most vulnerable, but we know that getting them to Canada is only half of the equation. Minister, what are we doing to ensure that Afghan refugees have the support they need in order to succeed when they start their new lives in Canada?
So this is really, really important. I think we sometimes, from the public's point of view, think the refugee journey ends when the plane lands at the airport. And I know, Mr. Sidhu, having joined me recently at Pearson when we saw a group who arrived from Tajikistan, for the people who arrived, that was the beginning of a new chapter and an entire new life. And that chapter only starts out on a positive note if people get the kind of support they need when they're here. So to make sure, to the point of your question, that people are set up for success, we rely on an extraordinary network of settlement agencies across Canada and a partnership with the province of Quebec to provide settlement services as well to new arrivals. To see groups being able to provide language training, in some instances childcare, to give them those supports they need to know how to sign up for a bank account or to apply for a job. In those early days, it matters immensely. I'm finding that people find a lot of comfort in being part of a community when they arrive, where they have folks who may be from their own country of origin, may have access to the restaurants they enjoy, and can have a bit of home in the new community where they arrive. Our settlement agencies are very, very good at working with groups to provide these kinds of experiences. But whether you're talking about the sort of hard essential supports like housing or income support, whether it's the training offered through settlement agencies, or whether it's those soft supports at a community level, we do whatever we can to make sure people receive a full suite of supports, because when they do well, we all do better as a result.
20 seconds.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I'd like to thank the Minister. I think it's important that as Canadians, we continue to support those that are most vulnerable. And I know Canadians across the country are stepping up. From my recent visit to Vancouver, meeting with local Afghanistan groups through the Chair's office in Surrey. So I know a lot of good work is being done, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for the hard work that you and your department are doing.
Thank you, Mr. Sidhu. We'll move to Mr. Brunel for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope you appreciate my tone. We know that every day here is precious. We all know that it's important, having worked for the Canadian Armed Forces. What about the process for for Afghans who still don't have access to internet services?
Minister.
Thank you. So there's been a number of different things that we tried even in the early days. I think there was even instances where department officials had taken to using WhatsApp to communicate with people, which was more prevalent than a way of communication for people locally. Trying to figure out the way locals communicate is really important. Okay.
Right now, Mr. Minister.
So right now, given where our programs are at and the fact that we're using with referral partners who are fairly sophisticated, I don't see it being a huge obstacle. But for people who are trying to get into our programs that aren't there yet, they can also work with people who are in Canada trying to help them. To the extent we don't have access to a person, and they don't have access to the internet, and because they don't have that personal connection, they can't get paper copies, and because it might be difficult, even if they had paper copies, to send them given their personal life situation, there are people who are facing obstacles as a result of that. I don't want to sugarcoat it. But we do, by working with groups who can represent them or advocate for them, have the ability for them to get into a program that way.
Rapidement, j'ai demandé.
Quickly, during the last meeting, I asked some witnesses why Canada had to do biometric tests, whereas we have already screened the interpreters during the war already. People felt that it made no sense because we had already looked at their security situation. They had worked for the Canadian government. Today, they are being asked to do biometric tests, whereas you yourselves know that it's very complicated for them. Do you agree with all the witnesses that came here and told us that it made no sense to make that request?
No,
15 seconds.
Okay, I in the limited time I have, when it comes to something as important as national security concerns, I like to listen to the advice of security agencies. Having a biometrics process in place is an important part of that process. And I'd remind you as well that there's a lot of people who did not necessarily get screened by the Canadian Armed Forces who could still be part of our program. And I'll continue to follow the advice of experts in national security rather than trusting my gut on something.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bruno. I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
The tone in this committee has been perfect, and I'm very happy with the members, the way we dealt with over the past many months, and looking forward to a little more time that's left. And now we'll move to Madam Kwan for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Former Afghan interpreters advised that applications submitted since January 12 have yet to receive a file number. That's about 65% out of the 300. This is about the same time as the government began its effort to expedite the process for Ukrainians. So could the minister advise how many existing staff or FTEs were assigned to process the special immigration measures for Afghan nationals, and how many new staff or FTEs were hired and when? And was there any change in staff deployment from IRCC on Afghan measures since August 2021? So if the committee could get those numbers, if the minister doesn't have them at his fingertips, to those questions, I would appreciate it. And if we can break it down to those questions from staff and FTEs, new and existing, in the month to which that breaks down to, and then the offices as well as the streams.
Do we want to just see if our officials have those? I doubt they have that particular information on your fingertips, but if not, we can...
Maybe just a quick answer, because I've got a minute and a half.
Madam Tapley.
Left.
I have some, but I don't have it all. So we have moved temporary duty officers into the region. We do them in rotations now to keep up that work. We have reprioritized staff from other lines of business to work on this particular lines of business, but the exact number that we have used to do it, we'll have to get back to the member.
Exact numbers, I would appreciate it, broken down in the streams and month and offices. Could the minister advise how many interpreters and collaborators who help serve Canada are still in Afghanistan, and how many of their family members are still in Afghanistan?
I don't have the breakdown by interpreters and collaborators. Can you just tell me what you mean by collaborators? Are you talking about people who came in the SIMS stream?
No, collaborators, I mean people who actually help, who may not be necessarily interpreters, but also help the Canadian military. They could be guards, for example, worked at the embassy, for example.
Just I'll ask our Deputy Minister, do we have it broken down by that information we could provide to the member?
Deputy Minister, please go ahead.
We would have that number for applications that we have on hand, Minister. So for those extended family members of interpreters that were resettled in 2009 and 2012, we believe all but 250 are still in Afghanistan. For those remaining SIM applications, Ms. McIntyre?
The time is up now. We'll come back to...
Just over 5,000, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Madam McIntyre, and thank you, Madam Kwan, and we'll move to Mr. Hallen for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the Minister, through testimony from this committee, we've heard from different generals, majors, through the VTN, NGOs, that there was heads up given months in advance. UNHCR testified at this committee and had said that they actually they briefed the government in January of 2021 about Kabul falling, And so what we see is a repeated pattern of knowing what was happening and no action being taken. 23 of your own Liberal MPs warned the government about the fall in December 2020, but the PMO told that member to mind his own business. It's a very, very concerning trend that we kept hearing, and it caused a lot of chaos, as you know. IRCC gave wrong information to applicants at the time when Kabul was falling, and of course, you and your government were worried about knocking on doors instead. So what was there any game plan from January 2021 and from to the time of Kabul? Was there any game plan in between that time at all? And if there is, can that be tabled?
Minister, go ahead, please.
So just before I do, I got to say, I appreciate that everybody's had a, not to be the tone police like our chair, I think everybody's interested in collaborating. I think everybody wants to move the needle on this. I take exception to the idea that because there was a federal election on the go, that progress couldn't have been achieved. We saw thousands of people be resettled. I actually think that election campaign was a particularly important one for the people that we're dealing with. I'm going to answer this question. We increased our commitment from 20,000 to 40,000 people, and I didn't see a similar commitment in your election campaign. I look back to 2009 and 2012,
Minister, I will
and
tell
I see
you
a
that
total effort that brought 800 people here, and their
campaign,
families were left behind.
MPs'
so if we
offices
want to
were
turn
shut
it into a
out
partisan
from doing
argument,
MPs' offices were shut out from doing inquiries.
Mr. Helen, can we be a little bit more respectful and let the minister speak? And I usually don't cut off people, and I would love to see if you want to hear what the minister has to say.
Change the tone a bit.
Wrap up. I don't want to turn this. I don't want to turn this into a partisan bickering match. And I've got to say, everybody at this table on Ukraine has been pulling in the same direction. Alexei, you've been advocating for chartered flights. We're moving forward with chartered flights and other solutions. Jenny's been great to be raising the need to do biometrics in third countries. Jasraj, you've been great to talk to me about the need to help people.
I only have a little bit of time. My point is that there was months of preparation that could have been done, but nothing was done. There was an election. Of course, we will hear from your side that an election was so important that it was important to abandon the people from Kabul. We know that some of the decisions made by IRCC cost people lives. They were sent to the wrong gates at Kabul airport. They were told to wear red, and they were targeted by the Taliban. So to say that it was an important election, I would wholeheartedly disagree, and many Canadians would too. And the fact is that the reason why I'm raising this is because we don't want this to happen again. This crisis that happened in Afghanistan highlighted the fact that IRCC, under the Liberal government, cannot do two things at once. It cannot do everyday business, and we saw that because our MP offices were shut out from doing any type of inquiries because of the election, and all the resources were being pumped into Afghanistan. That's what we know. And every MP can attest to that we could not do regular, everyday inquiries during that time. And it's because a selfish election was called. So again, your government had months to prepare. Was any plan made between January 2021 and July of 2021? Was any step taken in between that time?
Minister, please go ahead.
Sure. Look, and let me clarify. When I said the election was important, I meant on the issue of the resettlement of Afghan refugees. We made a commitment in our election platform campaign to resettle 40,000 Afghan refugees. And to the additional 20,000 that are going to get here because of that campaign commitment, I think that was very important. And as a point of contrast, I'm yet to see what my honourable colleague's plan was to welcome people from Afghanistan.
We had a very clear plan, and because of the Liberal-made backlog and bureaucratic mess under the Liberal government, our plan was to create more private sponsorships. I privately sponsored a family. It took the Liberal government 4 years to get them here. We knew as Conservatives we need to get away from the bureaucratic mess that the Liberal government created and do more private sponsorships because it was a better way to go and less burden on taxpayers that way as well. So we had a very clear plan in our platform. Now, I would like to just, if I could just,
Mr. Helen,
I believe I'm up, but I would just like to, I'd like to do a point of order and just see if we can get a few documents tabled.
If I can, I will let you to go on the point of order, but your time is up.
So I'd just like for the officials to table a few things. Any instructions that were given to IRCC employees for processing Afghan refugee cases and Afghan special immigration measures cases from January
Chair,
2021.
point of order.
Chair, this isn't a point of order.
Yeah, this is not a point of order.
Dama, please go ahead for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I'm going to take us back to the really difficult situation that people are facing in Afghanistan right now. The challenges that people are having getting out of the country. We know that women and girls are unable to travel without a male escort. I'm just wondering, Minister, what are some of the innovative things that you're doing at your department to try and get these really vulnerable people out of the country?
You think after 7 years I'd learn how to work these things? Look, thank you for the question. And the challenges are extraordinary, and I think we've been over that. But one of the things that I think is really important is we sometimes lose the human stories behind some of these cases. When we talk about the numbers and the process, and the treatment of women and girls by the Taliban is horrific. And look, I'll give you an honorable mention here, Ms. Damoff, for your work on the Status of Women Committee during our first 2.5 years here together. And you've been a stalwart champion for women and girls since the moment that we've ever met. There's one particular instance that has stuck with me that I just can't shake. There was a young 10-year-old girl who was on her way trying to come to Canada, who'd already been through a huge part of the process, who was killed at a checkpoint by the Taliban. And we don't know with certainty whether that particular person was targeted. But this is the same group who is now, in one instance, even removing Canadian citizens from an airplane because they were traveling alone. If there's one comfort I take from our presence in Afghanistan, it's that there's an entire generation of girls who've benefited from an education whose lives hopefully will be changed. Some of the things that we're doing in particular on this mission sorry, I'm distracted in my own mind over that case. Some of the things that we've been doing specifically to help women and girls. If you look at the eligibility criteria for the humanitarian stream, there's a huge focus on supporting those who are vulnerable because they're women. Sometimes it's just the fact that they were women leaders. Sometimes it's the fact that they were women leaders who were changing the society in a way that wasn't convenient for Taliban operatives. It's no coincidence that we are targeting women parliamentarians and judges. It's not because we like parliamentarians and judges as much as we might. It's because they were adopting laws that were promoting gender equality or putting people who violated principles that we believe in jail as judges. We also work with organizations that are expert at identifying people based on either vulnerability or the criteria we set out, including somebody's work as a human rights defender. Canada was the first country in the world to establish such a stream, and I think it's something we collectively can be proud of. By trying to work with groups on the ground who can identify people on the basis of their vulnerability, including people who are vulnerable because they're women, I think it's a strength of this particular program, but I'll rest a lot easier when I see that we've achieved our goal to get more and more of those women here in Canada.
Minister, I have just over a minute left. I wonder if you could speak to the importance of having government-sponsored refugees come to Canada and how that has changed since we were elected in 2015.
Yeah, thank you for this. And look, there's just, although I don't necessarily take it this way, there was a comment made a moment ago about it being less of a burden on taxpayers when we're dealing with private-sponsored versus government-assisted refugees. And I think it's really important that we're all careful in our language. Refugees are not a burden on our communities. They're huge contributors, huge contributors. I have seen government-assisted refugees, technically this was a BVOR application, but show up in my community with nothing, start a chocolate factory, and put dozens and dozens of my community members to work. I remember talking to my friend Tarek, saying that he experienced for the first time somebody asking why he was coming to Antigonish to take his job. That was the first guy they hired at the chocolate shop. These are the kind of stories that I hear about with the government-assisted refugees I met. They run restaurants in my community. There's a young guy named Omar. If you're watching, Omar, hello, it's good to see you. He opened a lemonade stand outside his parents' restaurant on the Pictou waterfront to save enough money to buy himself a Nintendo Switch. His mom told him about a young boy back home who needed to save money for a surgery because he had throat cancer. And Omar spent his summer raising money to pay for some boy he's never met throat cancer on the other side of the world. Somebody did buy him the Switch, by the way, so it all worked out.
Mr. Please wrap up.
Sure. Sorry, I could talk all day about this, Chair. Long story short, bringing government-assisted refugees to Canada to complement a strong private sponsorship stream is important. It allows you to effectively target people who you do want to bring here, and it allows you to move a lot more quickly than would otherwise be the case.
Thank you, Madam Damup. Now we're going to move on to round 4. I'll go back to Honorable Finlay for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So many questions. I still don't entirely understand, Minister, how it is that the IRCC expects people in safe houses and on the run from Taliban, partly because Canada and its partners leaked database information, and partly because the United States left database information behind. How are they expected to get biometrics done in country, and how are they expected to access WhatsApp or any kind of internet applications?
So there was a couple elements to the question. First, on leaked information, no data leak is okay. No privacy breach is okay. I think the event you're referring to, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, involved someone who replied all to an email, and the email addresses in some instances may have had details about who the individuals were, so other people on the thread could have, if they uploaded their profile details, could have seen. We responded by changing the practice so it was a web form rather than email correspondence, so that kind of thing couldn't happen again. With respect to people who are sort of moving about the country and how you're asking how are they expected to use WhatsApp or?
No, I said the IRCC is seeking biometrics done in country and also online applications filled out for people who are in safe houses and on the run from a ruthless regime. How is that reasonable in your view as minister? Why is there not special exemptions in this specific country?
So first, getting biometrics in country would be a major development, but it doesn't solve all of the problems. This is one of the challenges that we face, though. Most of the people who are going to do biometrics, as it stands now, will have to secure safe passage outside of the country and do them in a third country, kind of like we've now set up with Ukraine since we had to shut down our visa application centers there during the early days of the invasion. The safe passage piece is what we need to solve if we're going to allow people to get to third countries where we can safely administer biometrics kits and have people complete the process. So it's one of the real challenges when you're dealing with a territory that's besieged by the Taliban.
Part of the problem, Minister, that I don't understand through the chair, of course, is that when we're dealing with people who can be vouched for by Canadians. This isn't just some country somewhere where people are trying to get out. These are people who have, and whose families have fought alongside Canadians. We have all kinds of veterans reaching out saying, I know this person, I know their family. people who served in police services, in the military, who were interpreters. And we know them. There's people here who know them. Yet we're still making the same requirements of them we would for anyone coming from anywhere.
So my view is that when you're dealing with a conflict zone, the need to deal with a robust security screening process increases. Not only do you deal with people who might be a potential bad actor that you didn't realize. The vast majority of people are good and innocent people who would like to come here, and I recognize that. But you also are able to confirm that a person is who they say they are. When it comes to this screening process, it's really important that we follow the advice of our national security agencies. I'll trust my officials to correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is about 80% of the cases that are rejected for inadmissibility on security grounds come through the biometrics process. In addition, before you do biometrics, we do an enhanced biographic screening, so get what information we can on the basis of a person's name, age, where they've been living, if we have access to a social media scan.
I understand all that, but the thing is that they're being treated the same as though they aren't refugees, as though they're just wanting to come to Canada. We're talking about refugees, people fleeing from persecution, from death squads, this is very, I don't need to tell you, very serious situations they're facing.
Thank you very much,
it's not
Madam
a normal
Finley.
situation.
Time is up, and I will only give 2 seconds to Ms. Tapley if you want to clarify the minister asked you to.
No, the minister was correct. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister, and thank you very much, Ms. Finley. Now we'll go to Mr. Baker for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, I wanted to go back to our commitment to the 40,000. And can you just talk about the 40,000 refugees settled in Canada? There are many countries that have been involved in Afghanistan over the past number of years, before the fall of Kabul. And I'm wondering if you can just share with us, how does our commitment compare and what we've done compare to the commitment and what others have done in terms of resettling refugees?
Sure. Thank you. Just before I do, I do want to offer a response, because I think this is an important thing for people to understand about this particular conflict. Every refugee initiative that we've launched has a similar security screening process. One of the things that my eyes have been open to is that it's really challenging to respond to a crisis for a refugee purpose in real time as it unfolds. If you look at Syria, we were dealing with hundreds of thousands of people had fled starting 3 years earlier, and the groups that we were pulling people to Canada from were in camps in Lebanon and Jordan and had already been processed by the UNHCR. To deal with people and still apply a rigorous security screening process as a conflict emerges is a whole new level of difficult that I don't think we've dealt with in my lifetime, certainly. To Mr. Baker, your question, my honestly held belief is that Canada is the best in the world when it comes to resettling people for humanitarian purposes. If I go back to the middle of the pandemic, I was with the High Commissioner for the UNHCR just a couple of weeks ago in Ottawa, and he made the point to anyone who would listen that Canada kept the global system of resettlement alive over the course of the last few years when some other players around the world retracted and the world was shut down for reasons that we all appreciate now. From my perspective, I was blown away when I came to learn that in the year 2020, Canada resettled 1/3 of the total number of refugees resettled around the entire world. I think this is something Canadians should be really, really proud of, and it's not just a government thing. Canadians and communities across the country have embraced refugees with open arms. To your question on relative scale of commitments in Afghanistan, on a per capita basis, we're the ball game. The United States, on a raw numbers basis, because they had such a massive evacuation effort, is the tops. If I look, Australia's made a significant commitment with 31,500 over the next 4 years. I see the European Union as a total. I pulled some of these numbers ahead of time, just shy of 40,000. There are 37,000 total. I look at New Zealand, who's got just shy of 1,500. I look at the United Kingdom, who's got 20,000 over the next few years. They may go further because they have 2 programs, and I haven't seen clear targets on one. The U.S., of course, has made, they've provided support for the resettlement of up to 95,000. They've got, we've actually been working with the U.S. to have some referrals that they've evacuated be resettled in Canada, and some of those people are in process already. So when I look at it, and those are most of the big players on the scene when it comes to the Afghan refugee resettlement. By this time next year, with the exception of the United States, I expect Canada will probably surpass not just where other countries are at, but potentially their entire goal over the life cycle of this entire effort, which sometimes spans 4 or 5 years. So from my perspective, we're owning up to our reputation as being the best in the world at what we do, and this is what we do.
Thank you for that. And I only have about a minute left, so very briefly, I mean, one of the things that you've talked about, this is the key bottleneck when I asked you earlier in bringing refugees from Afghanistan quicker to Canada as being the issue of securing safe passage. And you can just talk about what's being done to try to help secure safe passage from those trying to flee Afghanistan.
Yeah, so it's this is the biggest challenge that I face as immigration minister. It's probably Afghanistan is what I've spent more time on than anything else, and this is one where every time you feel like there might be a solution or a lead, it seems to just escape you. So we, excuse me, I think for reasons we can all appreciate. Canada is not on friendly terms with the Taliban. I don't expect that's going to change really soon. We work with partners in the region. We work with international organizations. We work with allies across the world. There are different groups who've been talking about or planning to set up potential humanitarian assistance programs, none of which have the capacity to sort of secure safe passage or do the in-country biometrics that we discussed during a previous question. We work with Aman Lara, a veterans-run organization who's now successfully moved 2,700 people outside of the country. Every time we find an opportunity to work with a nonprofit partner, an international organization, or another state partner, we try to connect with them to figure out how we can work with them to move people throughout the country.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you very much, Mr. Baker. We will move to Mr. Bruno Desep, 2.5 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you once again for this beautiful session, remarkable work. I want to thank the minister who came before us for 2 hours. It's appreciated. Something I appreciate with the minister is that he seems to understand common sense. And I would like to come back to the last question I asked. The Afghan interpreters who had to be screened by the army and now are being asked to go through biometrics. Talking about common sense, what I understand is that I think the minister told me a while ago that the Canadian Armed Forces have lower standards than IRCC when it comes to security, when it comes to the Afghan interpreter issue. That's what I understand.
No, I would describe it a different way. I understand where you're coming from, but I think when you're dealing with people who may have not been connected very much over the past decade to the Government of Canada, when you're dealing with others who've not had that same relationship or maybe haven't gone through the screening process before.
Je parle vraiment des interprètes afghans là, qui ont...
I'm really talking about the Afghan interpreters who were screened by the Canadian Armed Forces and have to hide today. They have to hide to find a place to do biometrics, whereas they've been screened. I think it's absurd somehow. I think we are able to do better for these people. And as I said before, to use a quality that I appreciate with you, common sense.
Sure. So and again, I am, when it comes to matters of national security, my instinct is I use my common sense to rely on people who are experts in it. Our security screenings are typically valid for a period of 10 years in Canada. So there might be individuals who, if they had a recent security screening, who could potentially come into the program on that basis. For individuals who we've had no contact with for a longer period of time, then they might be required to go through the biometrics application. But in terms of the overall numbers of the 40,000 of the people we're talking about who've got essentially an expired security assessment or biometrics analysis, I don't expect we're dealing with a very large percentage of the number of people we're dealing with. The security screening writ large for the entire mission is very, very important. But I think the unique situation you've described probably doesn't impact a huge number of people. I don't know if our officials have information about the scope of that universe of people by any chance, would we?
Thank you, Minister. The time is up, but I would give Deputy Minister time if she wants to respond.
For those who were here, we would have to go back and look at what kind of screening was done at D&D at the time, and I think it would vary depending on other things. But the broad part of the program with the families of interpreters who were resettled in 29 and 2012 is that definition of family is extremely broad and includes siblings and their families and others. And it's not just the principal applicant that we would want to make sure that we confirmed identity, but it would be for all of those family members as well. And none of those family members would have been employed by the Government of Canada.
Thank you, Deputy Minister, and thank you, Mr. Bruno Desep. I will move on to Madam Kwan, the last speaker on this one, for 2.5 minutes, please.
First, I'd like to just ask the officials to also table the information that I asked previously with respect to the two types of applications for Afghans that are in process. How many of them have received UIC numbers, and how many of them are still waiting for the UIC numbers, and how many of them have been refused, if I can get that information. To the Minister around biometrics, I think he will understand this challenge. If you are in Afghanistan, you can't get to a third country, and there's no in-country biometrics being done, then they have no hope of actually fulfilling all the requirements in order to get to safety. So from that perspective, retired military personnel majors have actually said that the government can, in fact, do the biometrics in-country here in Canada. That will go a long ways to resolving the issue. So will the Minister take that into consideration and change the requirements as it stands right now?
I take a different view of it, and one, because I don't think that solves the problem of getting people here more quickly. Even if you have biometrics and you're in Afghanistan, safe passage is not guaranteed or necessarily made easier by the fact you've completed biometrics. The other piece that concerns me is if you were to do biometrics in country, you would lose whatever benefit it provided from a security point of view, because we have both domestic and international legal obligations that would prevent the refoulement of someone to go back to Afghanistan if they were inadmissible to Canada for security reasons. I don't expect this is going to be an enormous number of people we're dealing with, but when it's part of the security screening and approval process, I think it's important that you do it before someone arrives in your country.
On the question around refoulement, the government actually doesn't have any concerns with the Safe Third Country Agreement on refoulement. I'll just remind the Minister of that, and then maybe keep that in mind when you're dealing with the Safe Third Country Agreement. With respect to biometrics, it will go a long way. I think that the Minister will understand if people don't have documentations, there's no way that they can go through all the steps. And because they don't have documentations, what happens? Because they've burned them. What happens to those applicants?
20 seconds.
Look, every case is very unique, and trying to find unique solutions for people that we think qualify for our programs is an immense challenge. But like you've hit the challenge on the head. I think solving problems for people who are inside a country you don't have access to is what's making this difficult. For the people who are outside of
Thank you,
Afghanistan.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Kwan. Your time is up.
Okay, Mr. Chair.
On behalf of the committee, I want to thank
Mr. Chair.
Honorable. Yes.
I'm sorry to do this right when you were wrapping up. If you'll permit me for 30 seconds, one of our officials, after a 36-year career in the public service, is attending what I expect will be her very last committee appearance before she retires in just about a week. And I wanted to give a huge thank you and congratulations to my Deputy Minister, Katrina Tapley. It's been a pleasure to work alongside you, and I wanted to honor you before you head out the door on us.
And congratulations and thank you for the great work, Deputy Minister, you have done over the past many years, and it's always wonderful to have, Deputy Minister like you providing a leadership role. So, on behalf of the committee members, I also would like to congratulate the Deputy Minister on your service to Canadians, and also to the Honourable Minister and Deputy Minister and the Assistant Deputy Minister McIntyre and Giles for appearing today, and much appreciated. All the very best to you. And Ms. Tapley, you want to say something quickly?
Thank you for your kind words, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Minister for his as well. This is indeed my very last committee appearance, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we'll move on to Mr. Chong's suggestion on the committee business.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've consulted with several members of the committee just in the last couple of hours, and I believe there's a consensus. So I'm asking if we could change the plan for the committee for the May 16th meeting. Currently, you've proposed that we spend 2 hours issuing drafting instructions. But what I think there's a consensus to do is to rather do 2 45-minute panels with the witnesses that were to have appeared that were canceled because of all the rescheduling with ministers that has taken place recently, and then to have half an hour for drafting instructions. Or alternatively, if the clerk can so confirm, that we have 2 60-minute panels with witnesses that were previously scheduled but had to be canceled because of ministerial rescheduling, and have an additional half hour for drafting instructions. So we either have a 2-hour meeting with 2 45-minute panels and 30 minutes for drafting instructions, or we alternatively have 2 60-minute panels with a 30-minute period for drafting instructions for 2.5 hours. So
thank you very much, Ms. Chong. And
if that,
I want to clarify.
Yeah, if that would work, that would then allow us to have the 2 panels of witnesses that we were to have previously that had been canceled because of all the movement around the ministers' appearances.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chong. I want to clarify that I didn't say 2 hours for the drafting instruction. In fact, I put 1 hour, but because we just wanted to say that we already have interpreters appear before us, and now if they can submit in writing the brief, that was my intent. But
okay.
To your question now, I would ask analyst. Analyst, could you please clarify how much longer time you need for drafting this report on that day? Is 30 minutes enough for you, or you need more time on the committee day? Or Madam Clerk, if nobody want to respond, and I'll go to Ms. Damoff. You have your hand raised.
And Ms. Kwan also has her hand up, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Who was first? Sorry, is it Madam Kwan or was Madam Damoff? One way or the other. Go ahead, Ms. Damoff.
Okay.
We'll go to Madam Kwan.
There's a terrible echo when
yes,
that's
it is.
Better. So my understanding was what you were proposing, Chair, was that the 1 hour would be with witnesses like the refugee rainbow. I can't remember the other witnesses, but that would be the first hour. And then the second hour would be drafting instructions. Is that correct, Chair?
Exactly. That's
okay.
correct.
So I don't think that's what Mr. Chong understood, but regardless, and also we've heard from a number of Afghan interpreters. So we were just going to ask this particular group of Afghan interpreters to submit a written brief. Perhaps we could switch the order around and do drafting instructions first, Chair, because I think it's important that the analysts get our instructions. And if it's important to the opposition to hear from these other witnesses on 2 panels, that would be fine. But I think we need to do our drafting instructions first, because my understanding is that there's no extra committee time, and I don't want to have to end the meeting without the analyst having all the information they need. So perhaps we could do drafting instructions first. And then if the opposition wants to hear from Afghan interpreters rather than a written brief, then we use the remaining time, if it's 45 minutes each, for those additional panels.
Thank you, Madam Kwan. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would think that if we were efficient with our time, we should be able to give instructions if we cannot get an extra half an hour at the end of that meeting, that we should be able to give instructions in half an hour, and then therefore split the 2 panels into 45 minutes each panel. So then we give an opportunity for both panels to appear. And I think that in terms of instructions, I would urge committee members then to come to the meeting, be ready to tell the analysts and the clerk what the instructions are, so that we're not sort of like humming and hawing and delaying that process. If we're efficient and if we've done our work beforehand, I think we should be able to do that. Aside from that, Mr. Chair, I have one other piece of information or one other request that I'd like to put forward pertaining to this committee and then related to the report. I've said on committees many a times, and the Library of Parliament do excellent work with respect to suggested questions. So, Mr. Chair, I would like to make this request. For the questions that has been given to us for this particular meeting for the minister and officials, that we actually ask the officials to provide answers to all those questions, because I think they were excellent questions, and we did not have time, obviously, to go through all of them. So if I need to move that as a motion, I will.
First of all, let me say, I seem like on the NDP and the Liberal, the way I see it is, so 30 minutes, when we come to May the 16th, the first 30 minutes, if we come prepared, we give instructions to the analysts, and then 45 minutes each panel. If I have the consensus, so as I can get that meeting out of the way. Okay, how about Mr. Honorable Chong, you in agreement with that? Because he's the one who brought this forward. I just want to make sure he's on board.
Je suis d'accord.
I agree.
I appreciate that. All set. It makes my life very, very easy. And now moving on to Madam Kwan's thing. I think we had made it sure earlier that the information that Madam Kwan or anyone else asked, officials has already agreed, I guess. I don't think we have to further clarify that.
Sorry, does that mean to say that my request for the officials to provide answers to all the questions submitted by the Library of Parliament pertaining to this report will then be an undertaking for officials to provide those answers to us before we draft the report? Do I understand that correctly?
So I thought you were asking about the questions that were asked by the members. But
no, I'm asking about the questions that's been in the document that we received from the Library of Parliament with suggested questions for ministers.
All the suggested questions.
So they were like excellent. These were just excellent questions that I think would help our committee write our report. And so I'm asking them, moving a motion for committee members to make this request of officials to answer these questions provided from the Library of Parliament before we write our report.
Sidhu. There is so much echo. Madam Damov, please go ahead now.
Thank you, Chair. I agree the Library of Parliament does excellent work with their questions, and that's why all of us have the opportunity to ask those questions. We've just had the minister and officials here for 2 full hours, which is very generous of his time to stay for the full 2 hours, even though we started late. I don't think that we, those questions could have been asked by any of the members during the 2 hours that we had the minister and officials. I don't think it's reasonable to ask the officials to then in turn answer more questions that were done by the Library of Parliament.
Monsieur Brunet.
Very much.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Pardon, Monsieur le Président, peut-être vous me voyez.
Mr. Chair, my hand is up. I don't think we should go on forever. I propose that we vote on Ms. Kwan's motion right away.
I'll go home.
Yeah.
Is there an agreement on Ms. Kwan's motion?
Mr. Chair, there's some confusion here. What are we? What's going on here? Sorry, I hear a lot of echo when we're all talking. If you can just reiterate.
Okay, but Madam Kwan brought in a motion saying that all the questions that are in the document from the Library of Parliament, that we should ask the officials to answer those questions. And I would like to ask if there is consensus on that that motion that she's bringing forward.
I agree with it.
Chair.
You agree?
I'm opposed.
Who's
Let's
opposed?
have a recorded vote.
Alors, votons.
Let's have a recorded vote.
Let's vote.
Sure.
I've
Okay,
never
thank
seen
you.
this.
Okay, thank you. Let's have a recorded vote then. Please, Madam Clerk, please go ahead and call the vote.
Okay, on the motion of Ms. Kwan, Mr. Baker,
Opposed.
Ms. Damoff,
Opposed?
Mr. McKinnon,
Opposed?
Mr. Sidhu,
Opposed?
and Ms. Yip.
Opposed.
Mr. Chong,
Yes.
Ms. Finley,
En faveur.
Mr. Halan,
In favor.
Mr. O'Toole, Monsieur Brunet Sip,
Ooh.
In favor.
Oui, pour.
Mr. Chair, yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
Thank you, and the motion is carried. Okay, I'm gonna call the time is already 9:21. I can call the meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.